Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. This is your show where your questions are answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is Richard Murray, CEO of Eurolink, provider of VECO estate agency software. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, good to be back.
On your left is John Howard, developer, investor, mentor, author, TV panelist.
Legend.
Do
you know what? Someone called me that the other day, but I think it just means old. But then, Stephen, you know.
I know the feeling.
I'm going to say that.
I know the feeling. Only too well. Okay, well, let's get straight on with the questions. And Richard, you're going first. How do the panel see the implementation and use of AI being used to improve efficiencies in the property industry, and with what benefits, if any?
Okay, so AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, they're not just buzzwords. This is a bona fide industry. There's tens of thousands of people employed in the UK. We've got tens of billions, I think it's 30 billion at the moment in 2022, spent on AI. They think that's going to top 200 billion by 2040. So let's just get one thing straight. There's no buzzword here. There's no fad here. This is the way everything is going. And I think that's great for estate agency. I think that's great for the property industry, because probably the best application of AI is the understanding and processing of data and doing it at a far more accurate, in a far more accurate way, and so much quicker than a human being could. Now, that's not to say it's going to replace jobs, because we've talked on these shows before about disruptors and technology and replacing that individual. Yeah. We know it's a people business. People have actually beaten the trend in the industry, in my opinion. Yeah. And even as someone who works in technology, we recognize that, and we see that we need to build supportive technology. So technology that supports the day-to-day working lives of our users, to make them more efficient, to help them do their jobs better, quicker, and more efficiently, ultimately. And that's where AI, I think, is going to come into its own. So to give you a use case, predicting buying cycles, for example, your agency offices will have tons of data.
Yep.
AI will be able to look at all that data plus a whole load of other big data sets, and actually tell your users, actually tell your negotiators and your managers, these people are ready to buy, they're ready to sell, they're ready to, because you'll have that rich
ready to
data.
Get divorced.
There'll be that, yeah. I mean, it's kept the industry going for long enough now.
Thank goodness for divorce.
Thank goodness for divorce.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it creates one sale and two purchases, right? That's it.
And they do it 2 or 3 times, hopefully.
Yeah. So, being able to get that level of information, making really accurate decisions. I mean, how many times have you heard someone say, I know my area, gut feel? Yeah. Well, actually, what AI will be able to do in the future is be able to tell, it will actually replace gut feel, experience, and it will allow you to make very accurate business decisions. Could be, we want to sell 1 million plus 4-bedroom houses. Well, actually, your market is 3-bedroom detached, semi-detached properties, for instance, that haven't had a loft conversion yet. That it will be down to that level of accuracy.
Amazing.
Yeah. But you've still got to have the people to program in the questioning, haven't you, really? So I guess that's a
Do you?
I think so, to a degree, yeah. Because that effectively is the replacement of software writers, isn't it? Just a change of direction.
To a degree. I mean, these days, we were talking about the portals in a show a while back. So if you register on a portal, you register your interest in a property, that will automatically land into your software, and then it will automatically go through the GDPR. It will all go through every step of the process. So you've got that data. It's clean data. It's not duplicated data, so you can dedupe it within the process. So actually, there's a lot of data flow now that doesn't require an input. However, I always say estate agency has so far survived the high street. You're always going to have walk-ins. You're going to have someone picking up the phone and calling in where, you'll have to put that data in.
I mean, what I would say about property, it's the biggest item anyone buys, isn't it? It's the biggest thing anyone buys.
Single transaction.
That's
most people,
That's a much better way of saying it than I said, Richard. You're absolutely right. And I think, there needs to be some personal rapport with the buyer and everything else.
Well, it's part of the buying experience.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of the reason that I'm not going to say they failed, but the online agents, or pure online agents, have not been They've not been as successful as we all thought or hoped or didn't.
Well, they thought,
but they thought,
and a lot of that's been down to sales progression.
Definitely, without question.
Listing a property is one thing.
Without question.
Absolutely.
I mean, it is the point between reservation and exchange that's the critical part.
30% of sales fall through.
And that's what they that's where they're short on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also there is the other factor that at the top end of the market, people want their hand held.
Of course they do.
They're
paying a lot of money.
They want to feel like they're paying, for something worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very key factor. I will just tell you that one of our property question times, I'm not going to tell you which one and who was involved, but rather than have our viewers' questions, I asked the questions of AI, and the whole show was based on very intelligent questions.
Oh, there you go.
I remember it well.
Race for the panel. Yes, right. Okay, but I mean, that was a very interesting experiment, because I thought we would get very abstract subjects.
Can we do it without you soon, Stephen? Or
I think
still
so.
We have to be here.
I just plonk an avatar here and, whatever. Okay, there we go. John.
Yes.
I'm about to commence my first ground-up property development. So, I'm keen to learn from any developers on the Question Time panel, what was their biggest or most expensive mistake?
Goodness me. Well, I've been doing it 43 years, so I've got a few mistakes I can mention. And what I would say to everyone, and I constantly saying this to people I help and I talk to at different events, is that you will make a mistake. Everybody will make a mistake in property. If you can keep it to 1 in 10 deals, you've done very well. And I spoke to a very successful friend of mine, very successful developer, much more successful than I am, commercial developer. And I said to him, if you're being honest, Stephen, what is the, percentage of things that have not gone right? You may not have lost money, but not gone right. And he said, 30%. 30% of their deals. And I think that's a fairly honest answer. If you buy and sell property on a long-term basis, you are going to make mistakes and you will lose money. And anyone who says they haven't, I suggest is a liar. To say which one is the worst, for me, is difficult because, I've been at it 43 years. But you have to, the difference between a good developer and a developer that's not as good is how you deal with that problem, how you get out of that problem, and you anticipate the problems before they happen.
Yes.
Because that is the key. There's no point burying your head in the sand and waiting and hoping the bank will go away, because they won't. And what kills most people on developments is the interest. Because once the 12 months is over, 18 months is over that you've had the loan for, that interest rate is penalised, and it can go up from, say, 10% to 15 or 20%. That kills you. So you've got to anticipate that problem and deal with it earlier than you think you should have to.
Well, it's a classic oversight, isn't it? It's called time.
Absolutely. And someone asked me a question a while ago, how many developments have come in on time and on budget? I'm sounding like a terrible developer here, by the way. How many have come in on time and on budget? And I can honestly say, and bear in mind, I've bought and sold over 4,000 properties in 83 different towns and cities across the UK. I can honestly say, I can think of 3 or 4 projects that have come in on time and on budget. And they've been the bigger developments where you've got, you spent a lot of money, you've got a lot of management involved and all the rest of it. So the last one, for instance, the wine rack in Ipswich, 26 million project, came in on time and ahead of budget. So, but there is a reason for that, and that's because the management on that was so intense because it's such a big project.
Sure. Anything to add to that, Richard?
Maybe not in property development, but in software development. Quick story, one of my favourite stories. A client of mine claims to have the most expensive drinks coaster in the world. And on his desk, it's still there to this day, it's a CD of an aborted bespoke software project. £200,000 drinks coaster.
Ouch.
But again, we talked about how you respond to these things.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I actually love that. The part of the story I love is that he just keeps it there. He
Reminds
doesn't try
him.
and he's not embarrassed about
No.
it. He doesn't sort of like try and forget about it. It's a great reminder every day on his desk.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sometimes things can go wrong.
And it keeps
And we all
you,
make mistakes.
We all make mistakes, and it keeps you humble. And I think that's important.
I think the classic one that I've seen so many times doing consultancy at developments is developers don't think past the point of getting their cash for the flat. Example, one down here that I worked on, they were struggling. I said, oh, why are you struggling? People are complaining about this. So I said, right, well, let's just start with the issues one by one. I said, parcels. I said, you've got nearly 600 flats here.
600 flats.
So where are the parcels going?
Yeah.
Oh, we're not wasting money and time and money on a parcel room. The people could just go up and put the parcels outside the front doors. And I said, listen, man, this is, London East 14. How long do you think those parcels are going to stay there? So it actually costs them a huge amount of money to try and then reclaim some space.
To be practical.
And it's that kind of thing that I think can really catch you out if you're not careful, can't it?
I agree.
Anyway, all right, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break when we'll be asking Richard and John more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Richard Murray and John Howard. Welcome back. Hi. Richard, I know this is not within your software sphere, but it's in other spheres of your life, and I know you have an interest. Commercial property investment has historically been the preserve of the larger investor. However, since many of the new government regulations seems to be driving many smaller buy-to-let investors out of the residential letting market, could the panel suggest some low-cost entry paths to commercial property investor for the smaller participant?
Well, I think it's definitely worth looking at commercial property. It's my preference in terms of property investment is the commercial property sector. And it comes in all shapes and sizes. So actually, dependent on your budget, there's nothing to stop you, buying a small business unit, maybe 1,300 square foot as part of your portfolio. So it's not. I don't think it's anyone who's in the buy-to-let market. I would say it's definitely within reach. The main differences would be that it's slightly, it will be typically a larger investment. There'll be larger upfront investment. It is obviously very different usage. So you'd have to make sure that you understood the compliance side of things and the legal side of things. I would also suggest that one of the upsides is that the leases are what's called fully insuring and repairing leases. Which again, as a resi investor, you'd be very happy to hear that the responsibility of those insurances, taxes, repairs are all the responsibility of the tenant. Yeah. There's also the longevity of lease as well. I think the average lease is 8 years as opposed to 12 months in resi. So there's lots of sort of pros to looking at the commercial property market, and it represents 13% of the value of all buildings in the UK. So it's a decent sector.
Needn't be that expensive. I mean, I'm just thinking, for instance, you see a new industrial estate, there'd be a lot of small shell units, with corrugated iron.
We used to call them sheds in there. They were called sheds in
the original
days.
sheds.
They used to be called sheds. They're warehouses.
So something like that is not going to be, as high as a posh flat in London.
Yeah,
or anywhere near.
Stephen, you should know on that one.
I think the danger with the smaller sort of light industrial units are they can be a bit of a conveyor belt of failed businesses because they're usually someone who's just taking that next step.
I think that's a bit harsh, Richard. I think I agree with you that it may be a bit more of a conveyor belt. Nursery units, we used to call them. I don't know if they call that now. Nursery sheds or whatever. All these technical terms we're using. And I do a certain amount of commercial as well as residential. But actually, there's a lot of people who it gives the opportunity to start their business. They may not stay at the average 8 years, I agree with you. But there always seems to be someone else willing to give it a go. And even when things are tough, it's amazing. people with the commercial, people think, high streets are obviously a real challenge at the moment. But that's because the rents were always too high. Now the rents have been halved. There's still people who will give it a go.
Consider it,
But John, don't forget, those people who are going into, say, a shell unit to start a business, they're investing money.
Yes.
They're not going to trash it because there's nothing to trash, because it's four walls and a roof.
Yeah.
And that's the other benefit as well. So at the end of the lease, it's the tenant's responsibility to put that shell, in your example, back to exactly as it was.
Yes,
I mean, that's even over and above sort of wear and tear in lots of cases. Most people will get a schedule of condition done, either tenant or landlord.
Photographic evidence.
So you could.
Way to do it.
But again, if you're comparing resi to commercial, it can be attractive because you can almost walk away from it, come back in 8 years' time, and you've got your unit or your property or your premises
absolutely
as it was.
Richard, and also it can be anywhere in the UK.
Absolutely,
potentially, while I was keeping it local. A couple of things I would say is that on the funding point of view, it's harder to fund a commercial building than a residential building. However, what's happened with the residential is because interest rates have gone up, the amount you can borrow to make it wash its face, if you like, has come down. So actually, the difference between the two is probably less now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. I'm like you, Richard. I think I've done well out of my commercial properties over the years. I've done well. I've had the odd duff one, like everyone, but I mean, on the whole, and I think a lot of people now have been looking at properties to convert to residential. You now want to be looking at them saying, well, do they work as a commercial? Because actually, to convert them is so much more money than it was.
I think the only advice I'd give a smaller investor, and I don't know whether you'd agree with me or not, John, I don't like the idea of mixing between residential and commercial. In other words, so let's say you've got a shop unit, you've then got a flat above. Chances are you then get somebody who says, I want to take the shop, and oh, great, I'll lease the flat as well. You've got two totally different kinds of disciplines to handle, haven't you?
The only thing I would say is if you're borrowing money on a mixed-use development, that would be described as for people listening, I would say that it actually does help with the funding a little bit, because they know that the residential is always going to be let, even if especially if the shop isn't let yet. I quite like
that. Actually help.
It helps.
It could actually help the
but I do understand your point of view that there is a bit of a contrast there, but I think it helps a little bit.
I'm thinking we've got all this new legislation about no fault evictions and things. So let's say the person does rent the flat upstairs who's rented the shop. You might well be able to get them out of the shop pretty quick. Not quite so sure about the flat.
You've definitely got more. You've definitely got more power, if you like, as a landlord than in commercial than you have in residential.
Yes, I agree.
The word of warning I would always say though is between tenants you've got a 3-month grace period for business rates, and once that lapses, that falls on you as the landlord.
Yeah, absolutely, Richard. Unless it's listed. If it's listed building, no rates.
Or below 15,000 rateable value for small business relief, but
12, is it 12 or 15?
15.
15.
Oh, Richard knows.
Okay, well, there we go. All right, John.
Yes.
Question. And I'd like you both to come in on this at some point, and I'll explain why as we go along. Given that the government are about to bring in stronger discrimination regulations for landlords, what is the panel's view on these stricter regulations, and how do they think it might affect the buy-to-let market? Now, the reason it's put that way, for instance, if we take the classic one, the government say we're going to make it wrong for you to refuse to allow your tenant to have a dog, for instance. If I'd got a very nice flat, furnished very nicely and wanted, I don't think I'd want a tenant in there with a dog. And end of. I think I'd sooner sell it
It's your choice, though.
Well, is
yeah,
it?
but that choice is no longer.
No, it's your choice to sell. I mean, if you don't like the way that rent reform is going to go, then you should definitely consider that. Yeah, but that's not great. Again,
no,
that's more landlords leaving the
Well,
the
also,
sector.
Richard, the capital gains tax and everything else. I've got, like you have, property we bought many, many years ago. I can't afford to sell the damn things because if I did, I've got so much tax to pay. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think the government are getting into very difficult water here.
Do you think they're overstepping the mark?
I think they're overstepping the mark. And for a Conservative government, I'm surprised, Richard, aren't you?
Well, it's about giving every single applicant equal opportunity to rent a property, which in theory sounds nice, doesn't it? So everyone's got the same opportunity, but in reality, they won't have the same opportunity because by the time you've afforded as an agent, from an agency point of view, I think it's frightening. If you've got 25 people applying for a property, you can pretty much whittle that down to 4 or 5 quite quickly. You're going to have to give the same consideration to all 25.
Yes.
And then someone will challenge you. I mean,
Down the line.
Your clients, I'm sure, have had this already, Richard, where they're challenged because why didn't we get the flat? Why didn't we get the house? Is it because we're the wrong colour? Is it because we're this? It's just it's discrimination.
Well, especially so if perhaps it's a council approaching you to take a tenancy on it for various people under support from the council.
Well, I got a letter the other day from my local council. I've got a building that is occupied, but they thought it was empty, saying that they can force me to sell the property if it's empty for 6 months. I mean, if it ever is anything so ridiculous, I love them to try, by the way, but I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's getting to the point now where, as a landlord, you've got to make some big decisions, on what you want to do, because no fault eviction means that if you've got a tenant and they're paying their rent and you want to vacate the property to sell it, because if you leave them as a tenant, you'll get less money for it. You will not be able to get them out. No. Unless they've done something wrong.
It feels like it's almost going back to
1980s.
The very old days which is before my time.
Well, before
commercially,
your time. It's not before our time, is it?
Commercially, but there was but there was so much protection for that protected tenants were you almost couldn't get them out.
Well,
it feels like we've
regulated tenants.
Yeah.
I've still got a few left.
Yeah. But does it feel like we're going that
and
way?
Also, but the key to this is when that happens and you can't get the tenants out, those properties are worth 70% of open market value. That's what people have not twigged on yet. Oh, well, it doesn't matter because it's worth vacant, it's worth 300, it's still worth 300. No, it's not, because that tenant's in there, you can't get them out.
Could that trigger a review of your funding, for instance?
Totally. Because when it comes to review and you can't get that tenant out, the bank are going to get it revalued, so it's worth 30% less now.
And if there wasn't a stock shortage,
I
would kind of understand it. This is, is there a perfect storm coming? Yeah.
Yes. How stupid are they to do this at this time? I just can't get my head around it. It's madness.
I really can't see the purpose, and I mean, I think we've seen from various inquiries about poor housing, about disasters that we've had like Grenfell and things like that. It's so long-winded and complicated. I'm just not sure the government should.
Well, you take if you bought a block of flats, Richard, bought a flat in a block of flats, which no dogs are allowed. And now the rule is anyone can have a dog or cat in a flat. Whether they should or not is another matter, by the way. So what's going to happen? Is it going to be retrospective, or is it going to be from the point of the law going forward when it becomes an act? What's going to happen?
There'll be lots of challenges, lots of case law in the first few years that will work their way around these issues. But technology can help in terms of if you've got to process those 25 applicants. They need to be sent a link. If someone sent a link from an agency, right, everyone's got equal opportunity to complete these forms and let them self-serve. Because if you imagine trying to process 25,
I thought you were going to suggest the advent of AI dogs.
AI dogs. Come on.
Well, it will definitely help, but allowing people to self-serve will allow agencies to actually conform. because then you've given all 25 equal opportunity. Because it's not just bias, it's unconscious bias you've got to be careful of. So
I get told off every day by my stepdaughter for unconscious bias.
Yeah, but this is the legislation. So I think when you get to a point where you say, well, actually, as an agency, we can hand over the applications to the landlord, then actually, from an agency point of view, no one can come after you then.
Well, give me a real quick question then, Richard. How would you see this? You've got 10 people want the same property.
Yeah.
One person
not uncommon.
Yeah. One person says they'll pay you a year's rent up front. The rest won't.
Yeah.
Is that what happens? Are they then top of the queue, or are they not allowed to be top of the queue anymore?
Well, from an agency perspective, you will have to make all those offers clear and available to the landlord, and the landlord might say, well, I want the money up front. I want the year up front. But if that's then judged as being biased, it could well be,
because the landlord isn't in charge of the situation.
But their personal circumstances might be that they actually cash flow would help them to get that money up front. So then that's is that a legitimate business decision? I think we've got some interesting times ahead.
Definitely.
All right, gents, that's all we've got time for today. So big thank you to Richard Murray. Thank you for coming in, Richard.
Pleasure.
And John, as ever, thank you for your contribution.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.